What is up everyone, Rex here, and our first lesson is on the topic of introduction and historical evolution of 3D art. In this lesson, we will briefly discuss the definition of 3D art, its historical evolution, and the influence of artificial intelligence on contemporary 3D art. Let's start by defining 3D art. 3D art can be defined as art created by using specialized softwares to create graphics that possess three dimensions: length, width, and height. Since you're watching this lesson, I assume you want to be a 3D artist, from which I further assume you're not very intelligent. So, if you remember back in high school, we used to have something like this. That is what we use in 3D art as well. It is something we will cover up in our later lessons, but for now, just imagine the space around you. In modern times, specialized digital softwares are used to create three-dimensional effects. But it wasn't the same always. To understand the evolution of 3D art, we need to go back in time. Humans, in a way, have been making art involving three dimensions from a long period of time. However, we can divide this period into two parts: pre-1960 and post-1960. Pre-1960 art involved using real life and physically existing tools to create 3D art. For example, sculptures and buildings. Even 2D art was sometimes presented as art with three dimensions by giving it an illusion. Three-dimensional art has always been a concept and subtype of art, but it gained a separate status from other forms of art post the 1960s. In 1963, Ivan Sutherland created a computer program named Sketchpad at MIT. It was the first program of its kind to use a complete GUI for 3D art. It allowed users to perform basic modeling operations on shapes. While this might not sound intriguing, but Sketchpad was the ancestor and foundation of contemporary 3D art softwares. It was minimalistic yet foundational. After the origin of Sketchpad, techniques like BIM and CAD, which we will talk about in our later lessons, took 3D art to a completely new level. It was mostly used by construction architects, managers, and engineers, as it replaced manual drafting and enabled the users to visualize details and components like plumbing and electricity of a construction in 3D. It was mostly used by construction architects, managers, and engineers. And from this period, 3D art remained kind of a standstill for the next 20 years. The problem faced by 3D artists of that time were not software insufficiency, but rather hardware limitations. 3D art required massive computing power, and from the 1960s to 80s, it wasn't there in abundance. However, in the 90s, as computing power increased, 3D art started taking its shape. With the emergence of newer techniques like ray tracing, 3D art gave results which were more realistic. After which, Autodesk created the first 3D studio based on 5 modules: keyframing, material editor, Loftier, and Shaper. This 3D studio allowed users to perform basic mesh editing, handle geometric primitives, edit lofted surfaces, and use spline lines, something we will again talk about in our later lessons. From this point, 3D art softwares only got stronger and stronger. The benefit of using computer-generated footage over real-life footage was that real-life footage is subject to practical limitations. However, CGI footage is beyond such restrictions. It allows creativity to flourish and satisfies creative cravings. Slowly, the use of 3D art in VFX, environment creation, and other means has popularized 3D in contemporary world. As computers got stronger, real-time rendering started to prosper, allowing game engines and real-time render engines to exist and function. Despite having adequate computing power, 3D art is facing a new set of problems. Evolution of artificial intelligence has shifted the generation of imagery from 3D render engines to AI tools. It is still quite early to say whether 3D art will be completely decimated by AI, but it is quite clear that both of them will not remain uninfluenced from each other in the future. AI beats 3D in terms of speed and performance. 3D still has the upper hand in terms of creativity, customization, realism, and optimization. In conclusion, 60 years ago, 3D art was a minuscule part of art, but now it has become a separate field of its own. The courtesy goes to creators and users of 3D softwares. Evolution of 3D art has also led to the evolution of 3D artists. With that said, I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye bye.